Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 84. The RRB Rides Again. The first book today is The Heart of Everything That Is, The Untold Story of Red Cloud, 1822 to 1909, an American Legend, by Bob Drury and Tom Clavin, 2013. This is a powerful book, 374 pages. Red Cloud was a Sioux American Indian chief who ruled North Dakota, South Dakota, western Minnesota, western Iowa, Nebraska, Wyoming, eastern Montana, and southern Idaho in the late 1800s. As American settlers moved west, Red Cloud and his Sioux warriors, Sioux S-I-O-U-X, clashed with the American army and defeated the American army, but finally were defeated. Now here's a quote from the book. As the tale goes, one evening Red Cloud attended a White House reception given by President Ulysses S. Grant and found himself in conversation with the bitter officer. This is one of the troops that he had fought against in the Indian Wars. Quote, trying to explain the mystical hold that Paha Sapa had on his people, he told the officer, my ancestors' bones lie in the Black Hills. And the officer responded, horse shit. The officer replied, your people have been there no more than a couple of generations. They come from Minnesota, and you were born in Nebraska. You took that land from the Crow Indians. And do you know why you took that land from the Crows? Because you could. And do you know why we will take that land from you? Because we can. According to this book, the Sioux Indians, women were closer to slaves than second-class citizens. They did most of the hard work. The Indians were doomed by the Transcontinental Railroad, the destruction of the buffalo, and the overwhelming American population as Americans moved west. Red Cloud was a great man. His cause was doomed. On the other hand, those who fought American Indians, in my opinion, deserved respect for their courage. The next book is Valley Forge, a Novel, by Newt Gingrich and William R. Fortune, 2010. This is a tremendous book. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, the tough winter of 1778. The Continental Army, starving and freezing. The British Army dissipating, enjoying wine, women, and song in Philadelphia. Food and drink in heated homes in the city. The British Army miscalculated and did not attack, when they could have wiped out the American Army. The American Army endured under George Washington's leadership and with Martha Washington's help. The German volunteer Baron von Steuben drilling the troops. The victory at Monmouth Courthouse in June 1777. Yeah, I guess it's the winter of, I think it's June 1778. George Washington said, quote, gentlemen, may God bless you, and may your country never forget the service you have given to it across these 8 terrible months. Months of freezing cold, months of starvation, months of disease, but then months of building hope and pride, and then days of searing heat. You endured all. Victory shall be your reward. But remember always the warning of Cato, and remember as well Cincinnatus. If someday a question shall ever arise as to what is our reward, it is this, that we are free. We are brothers in arms, who years hence shall remember the brotherhood we share this day, and that should be sufficient reward for any man. That alone is our reward. That alone is what we fight for. Baron von Steuben said this to Washington, quote, mein General, history shall remember you forever. And Washington responded, quote, and sir, I shall remember you forever, and thank you till my dying day. America shall never forget you, sir, never. Yeah, Baron von Steuben, his efforts drilling the troops he just showed up. The Continental Army was not. They didn't have good battlefield skills in terms of in coordination, marching in order. And so he did all these drills, which paid off at the victory at Monmouth Courthouse the following June. This is a wonderful historical novel about that very tough winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, during the American Revolution. The next book is When Books Went to War, The Stories That Helped Us Win World War II by Molly Guptill Manning, 2014. This is a wonderful book. It's about the Second World War, knowledge versus ignorance. Nazi Germany banned and burned more than 100 million books. The American public donated 20 million books for American servicemen fighting overseas. Then the War Department and the American publishing industry published 120 million small, lightweight, paperback books for the American troops. These books entertained, relieved, and inspired and empowered those men and helped them win the war. Many of the troops became lovers of books. So I love this. I love this book because it shows the power of books. It's very inspirational. And one of the popular books was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith, which was the most popular of all books. So it's how books helped the United States and helped the Allies win the Second World War. Wonderful book. The next book is The Imperial Cruise, The Secret History of Empire and War by James Bradley, 2009. Very interesting book and also very troubling. I think the author had an anti-American and anti-Western attitude. He talks about racism and lack of respect for other cultures, the conquest of American Indians, and in war. He writes about American President Theodore Roosevelt encouraging Japanese imperialism and the conquest of Korea and China. And he blames Roosevelt for the Second World War in Asia. He paints a dark picture of the American conquest of the Philippines. What he saw is all truth, but it's not the whole story, in my opinion. He just sees evil in American history and European imperialism. He refers to the British forcing opium on China as Jesus opium. In my opinion, there is good in American history, but you won't see it in this book. Now, leftists would love this book because this fits their philosophy. The characters include William Howard Taft, who became U.S. President, Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt. In my opinion, I believe the American conquest of the Philippines helped both countries. The author's father was in the famous photo raising the American flag over Iwo Jima, Japan. It's good to face unpleasant realities, but also see the good in the world. So this is an interesting book, and in my opinion, I disagree with the worldview of the author, James Bradley, but everyone's entitled to their opinion and their worldview. The next book is Shattered, Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes, 2017. This is about the 2016 American presidential election, and specifically the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Bernie Sanders challenge, her opponent in the general election, Donald Trump, all the strategy, personality conflicts in Hillary Clinton's campaign, power struggles, which was a real problem. People struggling for power instead of working together. Differences of opinion. Yeah, people different ideas of what they should do. Scandals. Bill Clinton, of course, the former president and Hillary's husband. Hillary's ambition. And she really wanted it, and women worldwide were very disappointed by her defeat. So this is a very, very interesting book about the Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. The next book is Mother Teresa, No Greater Love, the most accessible and inspirational collection of her teachings ever published by Mother Teresa, 1995. This is a wonderful book, and she lived this amazing life, simple life, loving God and loving everyone, and a life of service. In Mother Teresa's case, the poorest among the poor in India, so that people don't have to die on the streets alone. So really an inspirational book. And to me, the saints in history are the real heroes because they live lives of and help make this world a better place. And they live to serve God, to love God, and live lives of service. And certainly Mother Teresa lived an incredible life of service and just was very, very inspirational. And I think this is something something that can inspire us to live similar, to live lives of service to God. The next book is Blood and Thunder, The Epic Story of Kit Carson and the Conquest of the American West by Hampton Sides, 2006. This is a tremendous book. It's starting in 1846 when the U.S. took the Southwest, what became the Southwest U.S. from Mexico in the Mexican War, then fought American Indians there in the Southwest, especially the Navajo Indians. Of course, the conditions were very dry and very hot. The Navajo were forced to live in a certain place, which they really couldn't survive. Later, were allowed to return to their homeland. Kit Carson, who knew Indians, well and respected them, and also was an Indian fighter. So this is a wonderful American history, and it is good to look at the fate of American Indians and what happened, and acknowledge what happened, and to have respect and try to understand the whole thing. And so this is a fine book. The next book is The Johnstown Flood by David McCullough, 1968. Another outstanding book. Another David McCullough special. He's one of my favorite historians. Good guy like James Michener. The incredible story behind one of the most devastating disasters in America has ever known. An old earth dam had been hastily rebuilt to create a lake for an exclusive summer resort for tycoons such as Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, and Andrew Mellon. On May 31st, 1889, a big rain came. The dam burst, and in the flood, more than 2,000 people died. Very tragic. Hard times, very hard times. Life goes on. Yeah, this was a tough thing. You had these people, and just incredible, the story of what happened when the dam burst and the people trying to survive, and just a nightmare, and all this death. But it's so he tells this story of this very tragic thing that should not have happened. It was an accident waiting to happen. And again, we should face these things that have happened in history and not sweep them under the rug. The next book is Gandhi The Man, the story of his transformation by Eknath Easwaran, 1972. This is a wonderful book, the life of Mahatma Gandhi, how he changed from a scared, impatient, selfish, weak man into a brave, patient, selfless, strong man. And destroy your enemy by making him your friend. Winning people over, kindness, respect, meditation, union with God. Independence for India through peaceful protest. Very inspiring book. Gandhi, that was his mission, was independence for India, because India was a British colony back years ago. And he knew the British were too strong. He couldn't fight them militarily. He couldn't lead a war of independence. So he had to use peaceful means, and it worked. Yeah, because they would have these protests where the British would come, and like the Salt March, when the British had a monopoly on salt, and the Indians decided to illegally manufacture salt from the ocean. And the British came because they were breaking the law, and so they came and started hitting these Indians. And they didn't fight back, hitting them over the head and really hurting them and putting them in jail and so forth. So anyway, Mahatma Gandhi is such an inspiring life because, he was a very spiritual man, but he was also a political man. So and to me, this is what we need today. We need spirituality in politics if we're going to have positive change for a country or for the world. Wonderful book. The next book is Francis, The Journey and the Dream by Murray Bodo, 1971. This is a wonderful book. Wonderful book. The life of St. Francis of Assisi, who was born in 1182 and died in 1226. So this is going like 800 years ago. An amazing saint, a man who saved Christianity, native of Assisi, Italy. Son of a rich man, he went as a young man. He went to war. He lived a life of service and love for Jesus Christ and Divine Mother. Life for service for God. Yeah, there's the famous scene is when he came from this rich family, and Francis was giving money to the poor, giving away money, and his father filed a lawsuit against him, and they ended up in court. And Francis said, God was his father. And he took off all this rich clothing that he was wearing, and then basically said, I'm gonna live for God. I'm not trying to please my earthly father. someone felt sorry for him and put a cloak around him. Yeah, that's the thing, is Jesus Christ, started Christianity 2,000 years ago with this very high ideals of loving God and loving others and service to humanity. But as we know, over the centuries, there have been a lot of Christian leaders who have not really been good people, who have not been loving or kind, who have been even cruel. And so Christianity itself hasn't been Christian. And guys like and if it hadn't been for guys like Saint Francis, I think Christianity would have disappeared, because as the memory of Jesus Christ's life receded into the past, the world has needed, or Christians have needed, they've needed people to inspire them to say yes to people who would live lives like Jesus Christ. And that's what St. Francis did. He lived a life, an incredible life, and very, very inspiring. Wonderful story of St. Francis of Assisi. The next book is Ford, The Men and the Machine by Robert Lacey, 1986. This is a tremendous book, 666 pages. The lives of Henry Ford, his son Edsel Ford, Harry Bennett, who worked for the company, Ford Motor Company, and Henry Ford II and Lee Iacocca and the Ford Motor Company. In 1918, half of the automobiles on Earth were Model Ts. 15 million were produced. Henry Ford started the company that made the automobile a part of daily life. The sad thing is he was not good to his son Edsel, who died of a broken heart at age 49. Ford wanted a bad guy, Harry Bennett, to take over the company. Fortunately, his grandson, Henry Ford II, fought and was able to take over the company and save the Ford Motor Company. Later, Henry Ford II battled Lee Iacocca for control of the company. One of the very tragic things, Henry Ford's anti-Semitism supposedly played a role in inspiring Adolf Hitler and a role in the Holocaust. So that's very, very troubling. So Henry Ford, the automobile has changed life as we know it, because it's allowed people to move around, and so he made this major contribution to the world and to progress. And it was very tragic that he was so hard on his son Edsel, who couldn't please him. He was a good guy, and Ford, I guess, wanted him to fight back, and Edsel never did. So that itself I found very, very tragic. But Henry Ford it's an amazing story, this book, and I'm sure there have been others, what Henry Ford did, how the contribution he made to the world and in transportation, which has changed life dramatically. The next book is Lindbergh by A. Scott Berg, 1998. Another outstanding biography, 562 pages. Biography of Charles Lindbergh, born in 1902, died in 1974. Lindbergh became extremely famous on May 21st, 1927, when he landed in Paris, France, after his solo non-stop airplane flight in the Spirit of St. Louis airplane from New York City. In 1932, he and his wife's 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was kidnapped and murdered. And Lindbergh, I think, never got over that. Lindbergh was not only made that initial flight, the famous flight in 1927, but became a major promoter of aviation. And he wrote, quote, "The thing that interests me now is breaking up the prejudices between nations, linking them up through aviation." He traveled constantly. In India, he hoped, quote, to quote, "learn secrets as yet undiscovered by Western science, even find bridges between the physical and spiritual worlds. After all, radio was unknown not many years before. Why mightn't there be some way of recording emanations from the human spirit?" So he definitely had some spirituality. He visited the Acropolis in Greece and wrote, quote, "In these ruins lay a timeless warning. At the same moment, one sensed the heights of Western achievement and the depths of Western failure. One realized how easily strength was perverted to decay, how human wisdom was more essential to a temple's walls than the rock on which it stood." That's a beautiful thought. There was a great debate about whether the United States should get involved in the Second World War. And the quote from the book, "The argument boiled down to 11 months of oratory between Franklin D. Roosevelt and Charles Lindbergh. FDR Roosevelt wanted the U.S. to enter the war, and Lindbergh was very much against the U.S. entering the Second World War. And Lindbergh said this, quote, "I tell you that I would 100 times rather see my country ally herself with England or even Germany with all her faults than with the cruelty, the godlessness, and the barbarism that exist in Soviet Russia." Lindbergh believed the Roosevelt administration had thus far pursued a course which had, quote, "led to a series of failures and disasters almost unparalleled in history." Lindbergh's predictions, if the U.S. entered World War II, quote, "Western civilization greatly weakened in a world full of famine, hatred, and despair, with a strengthened communist Russia, behind whose iron curtain lies a record of bloodshed and oppression never equaled." Lindbergh continued, quote, "Short-term survival may depend on the knowledge of nuclear physicists and the performance of supersonic aircraft, but long-term survival depends alone on the character of man." Yeah, I think that's very interesting when he talked to his efforts to stop the U.S. entry, because he felt that it would, and look what happened. We fought to free Poland, and Poland was not free, and Eastern Europe became colonies or under the control of the Soviet Union and communist states. He became devoted to Henry David Thoreau. Lindbergh was obsessed with the survival of the planet, and he enjoyed traveling to, quote, "primitive realms." He became a major environmentalist, and he loved East Africa. Here's a quote: "Lindbergh became the conservation movement's most effective roving ambassador. He worked to save the whales. In Indonesia, he met with the president, promoting national parks to save wildlife." Lindbergh contributed in a major way to medical technology, heart surgery, created a pump for organ perfusion, organ transplants. Now, however, he mistreated his wife and children, was absent too much, and was a tyrant when he was home. He helped protect Arctic wolves. He moved his wife Anne too much. They lived in many houses in Europe, Hawaii, and so forth. In 1968, NASA flight, the first second after liftoff, there's some information, used 10 times the fuel Lindbergh used for the 1927 New York City to Paris flight. Just imagine, let me repeat that. The first second after liftoff of the NASA space flight in 68 used 10 times all the fuel Lindbergh used traveling from New York to Paris. He promoted conservation in the Philippines, met Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. He promoted tribal people in the Philippines. There was a war of shame. Minorities were told they were ignorant, their dress was silly, and their names ugly. And again, back to the topic of the Second World War, Lindbergh said, quote, "In order to defeat Germany and Japan, we supported the still greater menaces of Russia and China, which now confront us in a nuclear weapon era. Poland was not saved. Much of our Western culture was destroyed." Lindbergh believed that the Second World War was like the Peloponnesian War, Athens against Sparta, which led to the destruction of ancient Greece, that he believed the war would help destroy Europe. However, once the U.S. got into the war, he kept quiet, and he himself got involved, and he supported the war effort. He flew 50 unofficial bombing missions in the Second World War in the Pacific. He taught pilots to have better fuel efficiency consumption, enabling them to make longer-range missions. So that itself was a major contribution. In 2003, it was revealed that Lindbergh fathered this is after his death, Lindbergh fathered 7 children with 3 different German women between 1958 and 1967, in addition to the 5 surviving children that he fathered with his wife Anne: John, Land, Anne, Scott, and Reeve. So he had this secret life. I think he never recovered from the death of his first child, Charles Jr., and spent his whole life running away from that pain. Very interesting man. Yeah, that was such a dramatic thing, a big story in the news, the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby, it was an international news, and it went on for months, and then finally, the child died, and I think, that was a horrific wound. I don't think he recovered from that. And of course, regarding people think he was anti-Semitic. His efforts. Once the war was again, he tried to stop American entry. He believed that it would strengthen Russia, which and you could make the argument that the Soviet Union was more dangerous than Nazi Germany, although I guess it's debatable. But he during the war, when the war started, he kept quiet. He didn't try to fight it anymore, and he contributed. But years later, people said, "Oh, so you changed your mind?" And he said, "No, he still believed that." So I think that's a fascinating topic, and what an incredible life that Charles Lindbergh lived. The next book is American Caesar, Douglas MacArthur, 1880 to 1964, by William Manchester, 1978. This is an incredible book, 709 pages. As a young man, Douglas MacArthur served in the First World War. Later in the Second World War, he led the Allies in the Pacific and in the defeat of Japan. From 1945 to 1950, he ruled Japan as a great humanitarian. He led the U.S. early in the Korean War and was relieved by U.S. President Harry Truman because of their disagreement over how to conduct the war. We were basically in the Korean War. The United States was at war with China in Korea, but MacArthur was not allowed to bomb China. He was in the U.S. Army for many years, went to West Point, played on the baseball and football teams there. On Corregidor Island in Manila Bay, he endured Japanese bombing and finally fled to Australia, but vowed, quote, "I shall return." He was with Philippine President Manuel Quezon and Vice President Sergio Osmeña on Corregidor in 1942 for Quezon's second inauguration as Philippine President. MacArthur was extremely beloved in the Philippines. Manuel Quezon wrote, quote, "No words in any language can express to you the deep gratitude of the Filipino people and my own for your devotion to our cause, the defense of our country, and the safety of our population." MacArthur responded saying this regarding the Filipino people: "O merciful God, preserve this noble race." His face was streaked with tears at that inauguration on Corregidor during the Second World War. 100,000 Japanese soldiers at Rabaul Island were bypassed, isolated, cut off, and humiliated because they were unable to fight. And many faded into the New Britain rainforests to live as tropical animals. MacArthur was committed to the freedom of the Philippines. The Philippines was MacArthur's second homeland, and the author describes the Philippines as dramatic, inconsistent, valiant, passionate, and primitive. Filipino collaborators with the Japanese faced death. The author's saying that the Filipino collaborators with the Japanese faced death otherwise. MacArthur was fearless. Many times he came to the front with bullets flying and bombs dropping. The Japanese soldiers liked to mock Americans and saying, "Surrender, all is resistless. FDR eats shit." And of course, MacArthur did return, and he came to Leyte Island. He was at Intramuros. At Intramuros, MacArthur stared down a Japanese soldier on a wall. He sympathized with the Hucks, who were tenant sugar farmers, poor and desperate. Manuel Rojas was not charged for collaboration by MacArthur's order. MacArthur had this to say about modern war, quote, "The problem is basically theological and involves the improvement of human character. It must be of the spirit if we are to save the flesh." He helped the Japanese change from a feudal nation to a democracy after the war. He considered Napoleon the greatest soldier who ever lived. Joseph Stalin kept 376 Japanese POWs for use as slave laborers after the war. American soldiers were kind to the Japanese, and the Japanese didn't expect this. After they surrendered, they expected punishment. American soldiers were caught, if they were caught slapping a Japanese, got 5 years in prison by MacArthur's order, quote, "That was when we knew we lost the war." MacArthur's advisors reportedly were George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. He had political omnipotence, similar to Julius Caesar and Napoleon in Japan. He called Germans traitors to Western culture. Regarding the Korean War was a limited war, a very terrible situation. MacArthur could not hit the Chinese hard, and this encouraged China. Korea, all of Korea, could have been freed, in my opinion. Of course, his famous quote, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." The parade in New York City for MacArthur was the greatest ever given. God bless Douglas MacArthur. Wow, this is an incredible book. And you know what MacArthur did, I think his great achievement was after the Second World War, what he did in helping Japan after the war. And he really, once the war was over, they were no longer the enemy, and he was dedicated to the welfare of the Japanese people and of Japan during the 5 years when he ruled that country. Incredible story. Well, it appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God, I hope you find a good history book to read. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray, at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
You got cut off.
You know what you could have done since